Esther from YMCA. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. Thank you for joining us for this breakout panel on youth employment in a post-pandemic world, exploring policy solutions to empower young people. I'll be handing over to Professor Cedric Dupont very shortly. We'll just wait for a few more people to join, and while we're fixing out technical issues. So throughout this session, please make sure use of the chat, sharing your thoughts, comments, and reflections. And if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A area. We may also use the polls tab, and we'll let you know if there's anything for you to answer. We also encourage you to share your thoughts on social media using hashtag YMCA Youth-Led Solutions so we can celebrate your participation. For the best Hopin experience, please make sure to use a desktop computer using Google Chrome or Firefox, or you can also download Hopin app on your smart devices. And if anything goes wrong, just refresh the page and it should fix it. Let's have a look. Do we have everyone? Perfect. Okay, so now to lead the session, I'll hand over to Professor Cedric Dupont of the Geneva Graduate Institute of International Studies, who will introduce himself and those joining him on this breakout session. Cedric, please.
Thank you, Esther. So as I've not followed any of the recommendation except Google Chrome, hopefully the things will not crash, but we'll see. I'm Cedric Dupont. I'm Professor of International Relations at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva. And I'm moderator as I'm also the co-chair of the task platform, Thinking Ahead on Societal Change. It's a platform collaboration with federal state that actually try to participate in trying to collect momentum or to build up momentum for thinking ahead on new solution. And we are very active in the future work. We had our own Future Work Summit last year, and we're happy really to participate in the YMCA Future Work Summit. My interest, I'll say a few words introduction. I'm really interested in that because I'm working on new organizational setup to actually promote better solution and better work. So I'll say a few things on that just in a few minutes. But I would like to introduce very briefly the members of the roundtable, who are, I must confess, way more expert than I am on that topic. So without any order, but in the list I receive. So we first have Jamie McAuliffe, and sorry if I'm a terrible French pronunciation with foreigner names, from the Aspen Institute, Senior Fellow, Founding Director of the Global Opportunity Youth Network at the Aspen Institute. So thank you, Jamie. Then we have John Lindsay from the International Youth Foundation, who is a Senior Technical Advisor on Economic Opportunity for the International Youth Foundation. Thank you for joining, John. Then I have on my list Colin McFarlane from the World YMCA, a National Program Manager, YMCA Scotland, the lead Community of Impact on Youth Employment and Opportunity at the World YMCA. Thank you for joining, Colin. Then from the government of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, we have Miriam Hosmeijer, a Senior Policy Advisor at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then we have, thank you for joining, Miriam, and I guess you can now hear us and we can hear you, hopefully. Thank you. Then we have Urmila Sarkar from UNICEF Generation Unlimited. Urmila is Senior Advisor on Planning and Program for Generation Unlimited there. And last but not least, thank you for joining, Urmila. And last but not least, we have Ki-Bom Kim from the ILO. Ki-Bom is a macroeconomic and employment policy specialist at the ILO. So he's almost a neighbor to me at the Graduate Institute in Geneva. So thank you for joining. So we have a relatively tight schedule. We're supposed to finish at 2:45 for Geneva time, so a bit less than an hour, kind of 45 minutes from now. Just let's say a few work of introduction by myself, and then I'll just be there to make sure that the panelists don't overshoot their time limits, and then of course to launch additional questions if need be. So just a few words of introduction. I would like to restate, of course, the topic of this panel of the roundtable is empowering the young generation so they can actually, as we just heard from the general plenary stage, that they could actually bring up or kind of shape a world that is in a better state than it is currently. And I would like to start by saying that if you are a very traditional employer and if you wonder why you would like to hire a young generation, well, there are four very strong forces that the young generation bring to your organization. The first one is that, of course, they are not going to bring you experience, but they are going to bring you imagination. And boy, we just need a lot of that imagination in the current world. That's the first very strong thing that younger generation need to be better, as my generation, be. The second one is that instead of reproducing existing solution, they actually tend to create a new one. And so creativity versus reproduction is that, of course, what we need very strongly. The third thing, which I think is very strong, is that we, at least, my generation, we always try, I'm not a historian, but I have many colleagues historians, trying to learn from the past, even though we know we cannot learn from the past. And the young generation, the new generation, tend to learn from the future. So they do foresight, they try to imagine the future, to see signals of things to come, and to actually just, if the signals don't look good, to try to shape the trajectory so we don't get into the wrong direction. And the fourth thing is that we've heard that, those of you attending different panels in the Future Work Summit, is that they have this paradigm shift from power over to power with. And of course, all of us working in organization, we know that this is not completely done as a paradigm change, to say the least. And so we need really, but the young generation tends to be actually much, much stronger on the power with, which really need to address the complexity of the current problems. So, if you're employer listening to that, think of these four major forces that the young generation bring you to your organization. Now, let me just say a couple of things. How do we empower the young generation, of the new generation? Well, I would argue in two ways. First, by changing the mindsets of those that are currently in power, I mean here, and by changing the organizational structure. And the two things go together. Changing the mindset, well, we still have organizations that work very much like in the control command mode, not in all domains, of course, the green, the care, and maybe the creative, which is really the focus of the summit, are somehow outlier to that, but still, even there, you have a lot of control command. So instead of thinking in terms of control, trust, okay? Why do we have control? Because we basically don't trust. You have a manager of a manager of a manager, because no one actually trusts anyone. So you have to change your mindset, and unless you give it a try, this is not going to happen. In terms of command, well, rather than command, listen. And that's where you mode into listening mode, in empathy mode, and where to try to understand what's going on. And then finally, I would say, in terms of mindset, I hope we're going to stop thinking in terms of planning. As we've seen, planning is, as good as a budget. As soon as it's out, it's really already kind of outdated. And so we have to change this mindset. And this change of mindset has to be anchored into a change of organization. And so, command and control mindset goes well into an hierarchical, kind of Fordist kind of organization. But these new things about trust and listen goes much whatever you call it, horizontal, self-managed organization, organic structure. If you go back to the work of sociologist Harry Mintzberg in the 60s, what he calls adhocracy, much more decentralized, much more actually autonomy given to a generation. And so from that perspective, I would even challenge a bit this kind of traditional thing, or let's collaborate. In fact, let's people do as much as they can by themselves in small teams, as decentralized as possible. And this is really happening even in large corporate organization and the private entity. So I would really say, this just as the opening of this panel, try to really kind of think of how to really create the macro condition, both cognitively inside ourselves individually, but also structurally in organization, to empower those young generation. And of course, this will help, create policy innovation, and policy innovation that is often kind of launched by a young generation. Okay, as professor tend to already speak too long, I'm going to stop here and give them the floor and start, giving the floor to all our panelists, if I have not lost my notes as a disorganized faculty member. So we'll start with an opening question to the representative of the Aspen Institute, International Youth Foundation, and YMCA. In the following question, and I think I'll start asking John to start on that. But can you bring to life how your organization is currently engaging young people in program design and delivery? And what benefits do you see from this local engagement worldwide, or kind of in a particular context that you would like to say? And so, for instance, John, I'm being told that you've been engaging in International Youth Foundation programming in Tanzania and the US. So you may want to start off to both Jamie and Colin for their own kind of word on this question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cedric, for that introduction. Yeah, let me provide everybody with a really quick overview of the way the IYF does our work, right? We are a small organization, and in general, what we do is we work with local partners to really build that, facilitation and that connective tissue that helps organizations really survive and thrive. It's about capacity building and building networks, and that's really the heart of what IYF does, rather than like a YMCA working directly with young people through affiliates. And it's interesting. None of this is rocket science, right? None of this is anything that I think people don't understand. But what gets difficult is the how, right? How do we make it real? How do we help put young people in control of their own futures, their economic and their social futures? And at the end of the day, it's about giving up some control, right? Some control as an organization and some control as an individual. And that's the really difficult part, right? Because we all have our own issues, we all have our own funders, we all have our own jobs, right? And so how do we practically give up control with young people while also at the same time ensuring we're all moving in the right direction and we're all trying to achieve these outcomes? And what we found is that really it's about the process, right? It's about the process by which young people are engaged, that young people are valued, and that we really are able to harness the sort of like the energy and the enthusiasm of young people, as you were saying, in these programs. And the way you do that is literally by starting at the beginning, right? You really need to be very, very, very serious about engaging young people as equal partners at the very beginning of any program. Typically, we think about it as program design, but it even really starts before then, right? It starts with ensuring that your organization, as an organization, right, is engaging with young people iteratively and continuously at all levels. So that includes governance of the organization, and that also includes in designing programs. And then once you're running programs, that includes in the running of the programs. And one really cool example that I'll share was actually sponsored by the Embassy of Ireland, right? And the reason why this one's really cool is because it was working in a program that was developing technical skills of young people within TVET institutions. And what had happened was they weren't getting the impact that they wanted, and they suddenly had this great idea. Well, we haven't actually asked young people. This is what they want to do. So they sponsored a program to actually retrofit their technical training programs with almost like a student council type organization. So building up what we would think of as student councils within the technical training institutes, really to make sure that young people's voices were heard, right? And once young people's voices are heard, they start to buy in and become a part of the process and a part of the program. And so, from our experience, it really is ensuring that from the beginning, young people are included, their voices are heard, and that's done through a very open and specific process. And that process really matters. And if anybody's interested in what those processes are, we can discuss that further. You can find more information about the IYF at our website. But it is really being very specific and very, very meaningful about the process by which young people are engaged.
Thank you, John. Jamie or Colin, whoever want to add there. Jamie?
Sure. And you'll probably hear some common themes across most of us because I think we share a common philosophy. So I'm representing the Global Opportunity Youth Network, and I'll also give a quick background of who we are and what we do. The Global Opportunity Youth Network was really founded for a couple of reasons. I and some of my colleagues who've been involved in youth employment programming for many years got a little disillusioned with the approach that I call the kind of silver bullet approach to youth employment, which by which I mean this idea that you can create some kind of a skilling program or mentoring program or entrepreneurship program, and suddenly that's going to solve the very complex issue of youth employment. And we're seeing too many of these ideas of sort of replicating programs or scaling what works that had a very narrow definition of what works. And then the other thing that really was frustrating to many people in the sector was that while we talked about engaging young people, it was usually very superficial, inviting young people to a discussion or a panel, you know, having a couple of young people at an event talking about youth employment where 99% of the participants were adults. So just to say that really influenced starting something very different. And the Global Opportunity Youth Network was actually started with young people 3 years ago. We brought together young people from around the world to think with us about what we could do differently. And what we decided to do was to focus on three things. Number one, to recognize the importance and primacy of place, that where this really comes together is in local communities. There are many efforts that focus on the national level, national policy, and that kind of thing. But where this really comes together is in local communities, local economies. The second thing we decided with young people was that we needed to build an actual structure for ongoing collaboration and partnership, not kind of project partnerships and project collaboration, but actually building collaboratives that brought together all the critical players from government, business, nonprofit sector, and young people in a particular location into a collaborative. And we call them Opportunity Youth Collaboratives. And then the third element is, instead of trying to focus on programmatic interventions or bringing in new interventions, try to understand what already exists, what's in place, what are the gaps in that local ecosystem, and then figure out how to try to move the whole system so that the majority of young people can have a pathway into the economic, into the economy and an economic future. So that kind of systems lens and approach really informs all of our work. So that's who we are. We're now in 8 countries and we're growing to several more. And young people are at the center of everything we do. So young people, as I mentioned, started this with us. They're in these collaboratives. We have youth advisory groups that are central to the design, first the problem identification and then the solution design in each community. Later, we can maybe go into discussion about what kinds of ways young people are trying to influence policy, engage in governments and that sort of thing. And I totally agree with John. It's about setting up first a safe place for them to bring their ideas and voice to the table, and then creating those connections with policymakers and decision makers and breaking down the power barriers that are often in place in communities so that young people can be speaking directly to those decision makers and bringing their voice to the discussion. But we can maybe go into some examples because I want to hear from Colin and others. But I'll just say one other thing before I pass it on, which is I also think terminology is really important. And I want to explain why Opportunity Youth is in our name. So too much of the discussion around youth in the United States and globally is about defining them by their barriers: disadvantaged youth, not in employment, not in education, marginalized, vulnerable. And again, young people several years ago in the United States said, you know, why do you keep discussing us as marginalized and vulnerable, talking about our deficits? Let's talk about what we bring to the table, our assets. So we really believe in that kind of asset framing of youth development and youth employment. So Opportunity Youth is really meant to capture, this is an opportunity for communities, for society to invest in the future. And so I think changing the language, changing perception is really critical in this discussion as well. So I'll leave it there and turn it over to Colin.
Thanks, Jamie and Cedric and the panel members. I can't add an awful lot to what John and Jamie have already said, because yes, I agree fully with everything that's been mentioned, and it's maybe just something around that we all understand, and I think we've all understood for a while, that there's a disconnect from the people that make decisions to the people that are directly affected by those decisions, and in our context, it's young people. And there has been an undervaluing of young people for a long time in terms of the value that they give to our societies and communities. I think that's been gradually diminished over the last particularly 10 to 20 years, and I see that very, very much in a UK context. And the key part that for me that's missed is the methodology and approach that youth work organisations bring to this sphere. If you want to work with young people, you need a particular methodology and you need a particular approach, but not everybody understands that, and not everybody thinks it's a valued approach. So as a sector, locally, nationally and internationally, it's about bringing that to the fore and enhancing people's understanding of what added value we bring to the world of young people, be that within employment, education, mental health, and the environment. It's actually the ability to engage those young people in a two-way process where we learn as much from them as they learn from us, that we start from where the young person is at, not where we believe they should be, and that it's a voluntary engagement. Young people aren't forced to engage with us, they choose. So they must be getting something from our approach, our value base, and the way we work with them to enable them to make better successes and better decisions in their own lives. And what we need to do is to be able to transfer that knowledge base to a local, national and international level to have the big decision makers understand what we bring and thus can support young people to better engage in the opportunities that are there. That's all I would add.
Thank you, Colin, Jamie and John for this very interesting remark from your experience with your own organization. We'll now turn to the national and international policy making dynamics from the international organization and the national organization. And so I will just ask the question to Miriam, Urmila, and Kibom in terms of the experience in the involvement of the youth into policy making at the national or international level, if we speak of UNICEF and ILO, and how you basically see how you've been able or to really involve these grassroots dynamics from the level of the youth into the planning or the policy making at the national, international level, and have you found that, if you have done so, useful, and in which way? So any thought that you had on that, and whoever wants to go first, maybe Miriam, Kibom, or Mila. Miriam, you want to start? Miriam, you have your mute. Or Mila, actually, let's have Miriam.
I can start. Okay, Miriam, do you want to start, or it's fine? Okay. Okay, I'll just start, Cedric. Okay, well, thanks very much. I mean, just to answer this question, and echoing a lot of the comments that the colleagues have already been saying, I think that we all agree that the voices of young people from grassroots and local organizations, youth leaders and their organizations really should and must inform policymaking at all levels, and because they'll indeed have the first-hand knowledge of their situation and needs. And as the session is around a post-pandemic world, I mean, youth have been disproportionately affected by school closures, by job and income losses, and they would be in the best position to know how this is affecting them. And also just to point out that they're an incredible source of energy, creativity, and they're capable of offering new ideas and insights that are really important for driving economic and social progress, and history has shown that. And just a little bit about the organization I'm from. So we're hosted by UNICEF, and this is where the examples come from, because the question is about what are the kind of examples in action, Generation Unlimited. But many of the organizations on this panel are in fact members of it. It's a global public-private youth partnership platform that was only launched a few years ago when I joined in 2018, and it's operating now in 47 countries across 7 regions, and it rallies major private sector corporations with governments, with heads of state, with civil society organizations and CEOs and UN and multilateral, but most importantly, the young people themselves around these issues of skills, employability, and engagement. and bringing them all together. And it is a partnership steered by young people, because young people understand the challenges they face and the future they want to create. And that's been a real critical driver for our growth, as still a startup in the first couple of years. And just to list some kind of specific examples, one that we've seen is a program that we launched last year, Her World, Her Voice, with the World Association of Girl Guides and Scouts and UPS and U-Report, which aim to engage millions of young women around the world by working directly at country-led level, bringing together their insights through something called U-Report polls, which is basically a social media messaging tool and data collection system. And basically this data was used to advocate for greater equality of opportunity and choice and skills and opportunities and employment opportunities, and is in progress. So a really great example of how technology can be used to empower young people and get their voices heard in decision making. Another example is in India, a platform, GenU, which is called Yuva, which is the Hindi terminology for youth power, where it's been engaging millions of young people across the country as part of the structure, young people's action teams, and ensuring they are represented not only in the levels of civil society organizations, but also in government, and shaping really policy and program initiatives, and working even with private sector, such as PricewaterhouseCoopers, to upskill with a very big goal of upskilling 300 million youth by 2030. The latest example I think is really amazing is that these young people got together and created an initiative called Young Warriors just recently to respond to the crisis, the COVID crisis in India, where they used actually WhatsApp and other tools to help combat COVID by sharing essential resources about where to get vaccines, where to get oxygen, and facilitating really safe online spaces for young people to talk about their struggles. And it's also become a platform where they can talk about their struggles for searching in terms of employment and skilling opportunities. And other examples in Kosovo, a very good one, called the Podium Initiative, which is trying to encourage youth to be part of municipal budget making, which is really important. And other kinds of those examples in Argentina, Nepal, even in Boston, the US, and more, where it's really, I think one of the experts said something about how young people also have to have access to information and skills to be able to inform this kind of budget and policy making, which is, I think, important. And another great example with the Council of Europe, the Advisory Council of Youth, which is made of 30 representatives from youth organizations across the continent, where they're coming together with young people and adults in shared decision making around work priorities, policies, programs, and budgets. Just a last point, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this one because I see my friend Key is going to speak after me. So I normally would have said more, because ILO is a really key partner actually with GenU, and they have an amazing platform, the Global Initiative on Decent Jobs for Youth. And they've been doing really important work on engaging young people in employment strategy, and forming national action plans on youth employment, which is super important to address the specific disadvantages youth face in the labor market. And I think this, when I used to be working with the ILO before I joined UNICEF, I'd done a lot of work around engaging more young people in trade union organizations and in employer organizations. But I'm sure I'm not going to talk too much about that because I see Key on the panel, and I'm surely addressing that in those points. So those are just some examples to start off. Thank you.
Thank you, Urmila. Miriam, would like to go now? We lost Miriam. Well, so
maybe
Key,
over to Key.
Yeah, Key, please go ahead.
Okay, so while I think Miriam will fixes the mic issue. So thanks very much, Cedric. Thank you to the World YMCA and all the organizers for this opportunity. I think many, the roundtable panelists have already said many of the important things, but at the ILO, definitely, the voices of young people, they play a very important role in, in the development of our programs, in our delivery. So whether it's our community-based enterprise development programs, whether it's through the partnership with UNICEF and Generation Unlimited that Uma had just mentioned, This new platform, for example, is called the Youth Foresight. In addition to this UN system-wide partnership that we have, the global initiative on decent jobs for youth. So it's not just an ILO initiative, but really a UN system-wide initiative in partnership with young people, whether it's in consultations with refugees and forcibly displaced people in Africa and the Middle East. In fact, a project that is supported by the Netherlands, or through our research, we are trying to make sure that the voices and the views of young people are incorporated in this, but importantly also that youth exercise their right to participate in decision-making processes that influence their lives. And so I think for example, in terms of research that I just mentioned, it was great to see, for example, that this World YMCA Summit focused on the issues of the green economy, the digital economies. Because in fact, our next global employment trends for youth report will also focus on the 5 economies: so the blue economy, the green economy, the digital economy, the creative economy, and the care economy. Because also this was part of the follow-up and part of the mandate or research item that was provided in 2019 when we hosted a global employment forum for youth in Nigeria. And so these are some of the requests that came from young people, and so we're following up on that. And also, I think it's important to mention that in terms of research, also that young people are not just just superficially engaged. I think as Jamie has mentioned earlier, but really are more research partners. And so during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, we worked very closely with young people to undertake an online survey on the impacts of COVID, to better understand what the impacts have been on young people, but also to highlight some of the actions that they've undertaken during the pandemic, and also their views on how best to address this pandemic. So having said that, of course, but I think it's important to emphasize that there's a lot more that needs to be done. I think to really, for example, to really embed young people and their views in institutions. And I think an important aspect in this regard is something, in fact, that Uma has just mentioned, that there are important labor market institutions such as trade unions and employee organizations. But we know very well that that they're not particular they sometimes are not particular interest to young people, and of course trade unions and employee organizations have to make extra effort to make sure that the views of young people are incorporated. But also I would urge young people to take a deeper appreciation, also interest in these very important labor market institutions. Thank you.
Kibon. Miriam? Can you hear us, Miriam, or can you? No, you're still mute on my screen, so I don't know. Well, I guess I'll open the discussion, and when you can join, please let us know, and then we'll give you the floor as immediately as possible. Let me maybe just react. There was also interesting comment in the chat by John Phillips, in the sense that I had a similar question, and to which extent, and I'm drawing on my experience, just as being, as we were told by John and Jamie, to be really also working locally. In Switzerland, you may have heard that the Swiss federal government just ditched a kind of a more dynamic agreement with the EU. So it's not Swixit or Swixexit, I don't know how to do it, but it's kind of interesting. And it really strikes me that I don't think the youth were included at all in that discussion, in that decision. So if you think there is one important decision that the Swiss government should make, and for youth, is what's going to be the relationship with the EU, right around it. And really, to my knowledge, youth organizations have not been consulted at all, and I don't even think they are integrated at all in the policy-making processes in Switzerland. So the question that John says is, say the government called the shot, And he mentioned the fact that there are some governments once you have a ministry of youth, and whether this type of development is a good thing or the bad thing. But anything which actually any of you would like to say about how when government make a decision or parliament make a decision, can a very active involvement of the youth, if of course the youth are willing to seize the ball, which is a point was made by Key Baum in the sense to use their rights. So that could be, and so the general question, if this is not happening, what are systemic barriers to this happening, so that there has been more on that, not enough of what all of you have been calling from or underlying, this process-based, this kind of from very early on, so upstream, not really kind of wait downstream that things happen. So any thought that you may have and follow up, or even you want to address specifically the question raised by John in the chat. Anyone?
I mean, I'll jump in.
Yes.
I really would leave it to Urmila and Key to talk about the national policy level. How the Global Opportunity Network is trying to provide that space I mentioned earlier so that young people can begin talking directly with local decision makers and policymakers. And what I'll actually say first is what we hear a lot from young people, which is quite frustrating to them, is that they'll hear from government officials and politicians once every 2 or 4 years, or whatever the election cycle is. A couple of months before the election, they'll meet with young people. They'll have a lot of conversations with young people and listen to them. And then as soon as the election is gone, that's it. So that's how a lot of government officials in many of the countries we're operating in think about engaging with young people. It's during election cycles. And young people obviously are like, look, we're not here just to advise you and give our voice during election cycle. We want to be engaging with you once you're in government to influence how you're making policy that affects our lives. So in creating those channels is incredibly important. I'll give you one example, maybe similar to Urmila's. In Mombasa, one of our communities, young people organized early on during the outset of the COVID pandemic to basically talk with the county government about how they could mobilize young volunteers, get some basic training and safety equipment so they could go out into the communities and at least provide information, support for people who are having trouble getting access to protective equipment, to food, and that sort of thing. And so, there are lots of these direct engagement mechanisms, but the basic idea I'd want to put out there is you've got to create the structure, the kind of the platform. And then the one other thing I would mention that's been really important is you have to also provide training and capacity building to young people to help them create skills and the confidence to be engaged in those conversations. It's daunting sometimes to go into a meeting with the local governor or a local politician and raise your voice. So you want to make sure they're prepared, and we do a lot of training and preparation with young people before we put them in that position. So that's something else I'll just put out there, but I'd love to hear from my colleagues.
Sorry, Cedric, if I can jump in there, because again, brilliant points, Jamie. And this might be hopefully not too controversial, but I think we as organisation need to get our houses in order, because we all, I think about the YMCA movement, we engage with something like 65 million young people across the world, but we don't always do it together, and we don't always do it together with other people that are specialists like ILO, like Generation Unlimited, with other, like Jamie, the Aspen Institute, that deliver amazing pieces of work. But if we all continue to do this youth employment in our own individual silos, we'll continue to be, young people will continue to get a bad service, if we're being honest. I think if we are all on the same page, we have the same morals, values and approach, then we need to work better together. And that's a call out to our national organisations and our international organisations to collaborate more effectively. Because if we can do that, we can shift change for those young people in Mombasa, in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, in Chicago, that we directly work with. Because if we don't, we will continue to operate in a siloed approach, which is proven to be ineffective.
If you just join us, if you've seen that Miriam has posted something on the chat regarding that question, as she cannot get through it, kind of interactively. Oh, you can now?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to illustrate what we do on the national level, and we hope that will trickle down into international level and all community levels where we work in. So in 2019, a special ambassador was assigned at the ministry, responsible for everything that concerns work, education, and meaningful youth participation. He developed under his responsibility, but with a lot of partners and a lot of young people from all over Africa and the MENA region, so Middle East, North Africa, a strategy called Youth at Heart. And that strategy covers the need for improved education to get better prospects in the future, if it's about jobs or even political participation of young people. And also in that strategy, it's addressed that meaningful youth participation is so important. So we're on the process now to train people that are working at embassies and partners that are open for it, how to work meaningfully with young people and involve them from the beginning, not only when the program is already designed, but when you start designing your policy, when you start designing a program, till the implementation and evaluation of the program. And we have at the ministry some good experience already with meaningful youth participation in program implementation, in program design, program evaluation, but we always, we can always improve, and we will, because we are in the process of learning as well. And I think working with young people is very energetic, and you can learn every day. So we will never stop that process of improving ourselves in that. But very welcome to have some more questions to respond to.
Thank you, Miriam. Yes, Key.
So just a very quick note on the issue of ministries of youth and labor, and I think in many developing countries, ministries of youth, ministries of labor are often the most underfunded ministries, the most it's in many ways the weakest ministries. And so I think it really highlights, in order to really deliver on some of the challenges youth employment, that there is a much stronger coordination between ministries, and of course with different stakeholders, including other labor market institutions, but with different organizations that are represented otherwise, but really to work and of course I think, as we all know, the different many different kinds of youth employment programs, and at the country level. So really, the need to really to make sure that things efforts are coherent and really serve the needs of development priorities in the country and youth of those countries. Thank you.
Is it all right if I?
Sure.
Yeah, no, I think all the colleagues said already some really great things, and just kind of going back to the and also great to hear about Youth at Heart. By the way, I'm glad, Miriam, you could finally connect, because Jenny's also been really strong supporter of that great initiative. And just to say, I mean, when we look at the barriers, we talked about typically where they have kind of lack of voice and these critical decisions affecting them, whether it's in education work or in their community. And also just to say that when we see these kinds of youth consultations occur, I've found, and I'm sure you'd all agree, that sometimes the topics can be taken as tokenistic in nature, or they're not necessarily given the same weight as topics that are proposed by adults or acted upon. And these are the things that we need to change, aside from the fact that they're also typically underrepresented in trade unions and those kinds of organizations. And I think we all agree on those things. One thing I did want to add to that is the importance of also ensuring that we have disadvantaged youth as spokespeople people for the youth as well. And I know that the colleagues all on the panel are working to promote that. They don't have necessarily the same kind of access to learning and skilling opportunities. And I think for GenU, but I think all the organizations on this panel agree that we must work together. I think Colin was saying the importance of working together, but also working together to bring those voices of those young people that are most marginalized. How do we get those voices at the center and informing policy making, I think is really important. And as a former, I used to be long time back, a former student and youth leader, and I've seen over the last 20 years I've been working in the international development field, and I still see young people are often seen as a beneficiary group in traditional development work. And we still need to work on how do we ensure young people are equal partners in this space. That's actually why I moved to the Generation Unlimited, because that's also behind the mission. And I think that's really important. And we need to encourage legislative frameworks, I think, where it has a safe space for young people and structures. I think Jamie, John have already mentioned about the importance of youth councils, youth parliaments. I think all of those are important, and even celebrating our young MPs. We even have some young leaders on our GenU leadership board. We have the youngest Minister of Youth from the UAE, Minister Shama, on there. I think we also need to celebrate that kind of leadership as well. So just kind of to add, and a final point, that completely agree with the point about the importance of skills building and orienting young people so that they're able to effectively contribute to these kinds of national and local policy making processes. And I mentioned some examples before, happy to share more on real changes that young people are making to improve investments for young people, also in the employment area at municipal levels, at local levels, and national levels around the world. So just some last points there.
Thank you, Urmila. Just as John, just as a note to echo what Colin was saying about making our house in order, I think even at the academic institution, I can tell you the way we think of syllabi and curricula. I think we're not yet empowering our students, which actually we still decide on what is good for them, rather than actually having them tell us, what they need. Which, as you know, is of course, I guess it's everything is more conservative and rigid, but I think it's applied across the board because we're supposed to actually also give them the skills, so that even though the privileged one, I guess, in academic, but I think even there, this is not really happening. But John, you wanted to add something.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cedric. And following on your point, and also the great point from Ms. Urmila, is, we're talking about youth and we're talking about our programs, right? How can we integrate youth in our programs? How can we integrate youth into our work? There's a whole world of young people out there who view the world differently, right? The world has changed. I mean, everybody always says that, but it's true. Information flows freely, knowledge flows freely, ideas flow freely. And so how do we think about policy at these different levels, national and local, so that young people, young leaders, young social entrepreneurs who are blurring these lines between economic outcomes and social outcomes can bring their ideas to fruition and not just be a part of our ideas, but they lead with their ideas. And I think that's really kind of the leading edge on the policy front, right? And how we can support those young leaders and those young social entrepreneurs to lead with their ideas, and not just be a part of our ideas. I mean, it often starts at the top and works its way down, but creating those spaces, I think we could do a lot better in creating those spaces for young people and for the young leaders to lead with their ideas as well.
Anyone like to follow on that? Yeah. The criticism that could be said
very quickly.
Yes, go ahead, Miriam.
I also put it in the chat. I totally agree with John. We should stop talking about young people, and especially at policy level. We used to think like, what should we do for the young people instead of what should we do with the young people? And that's also the reason after we developed the strategy within the ministry, there was a whole forum organized that Urmila also told about just a minute ago, last year in November. And the next steps now are setting up a youth advisory board. We have this kind of board already, which is called West Wing, but they're looking more into entrepreneurship. Now we're setting up a board with young people. And it is 8 young people out of the focus countries, so Middle East, North Africa, and the rest of Africa, and 2 people from the Netherlands. They will talk about what would the policy of international development should look like. So we're going to really talk with them to design our policies and further programs. So that's one way. You know, we taking it as a steps because it's a learning process as well. But I think one of the things that we as policymakers should stop talking about young people, what we should do for them, and talking with them and really take them into a leader position and listen to what kind of decision they would like to take and what kind of interventions they think would be best. Because it's also, and I like the Jamie that you said about the systemic approach in the beginning, like we really should look into a systemic approach and systemic changes. So not only train young people at that moment to bring them further, but really think about, okay, in the next generations, then they should, you know, profit of a better education system, and how can we build that together with young people, with states, with educational ministries, with everybody who's part of an education system, like the private sector. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me, and the patience.
Things happen, and we're patient. Yeah, thank you, Miriam. So I know that we're getting close to the end. So we have about a couple of minutes left. Anyone? I think so. There's a lot of convergence on this roundtable of what, you know, how we should really change the way we engage and we work with the young people. It's very much you know, process oriented, of course, and the systemic. So we have to really think systemically and then to really act very locally and to use the leverage that we can. And also, of course, be very much into this power with, not really to think what they would need. And of course, that needs to change both at the private organization, public organization, national, international level. And there's a lot of work, but there's also a lot of opportunity, as it was actually highlighted by Jamie in his opening statement. So any closing thought or remark that anyone would like to?
I'll just jump in with one very practical suggestion. Yeah, just and then complement the YMCA. We haven't mentioned language as a barrier, particularly for opportunity youth, as we call them, or more marginalized groups. And that's one thing we recognized very early on, that most of the youth events require young people, global youth events, require young people to speak English. And by definition, that excludes the majority of young people that we actually want to work with. So working to really build in opportunities for young people to speak in their local language and provide translation so they can join others across global events and regional events is it's an investment, but it's really worth it. And then the second thing I'd say is that, to Miriam's point, once you really start listening to young people, you'd be surprised what they want to talk about. You know, they don't want to talk about soft skills. They've heard about soft skills for the last 20 years. They want to talk about things like, what are the kind of structural barriers they're facing, racism, the caste system, gender inequality. So once you start asking what they want to talk about, it really kind of uncovers new thematics that I think are really important and aren't typically part of a youth opportunity, youth employment conversation. It's something that we've really recognized and respected. So just thought I'd add that.
Thank you for this. Indeed, soft skills are more for my generation than I guess the young one, but at least applying them in specific context and how to make them happen so that they can leverage their power is actually, the influence is actually still very much needed. Well, and I don't see, I hope that we didn't leave any very burning question in the chat, but I'm not very good at multitasking, but I hope that there is no burning question left open in the chat. And I would like to thank you all for joining, for some of you after, several trials, but, thank you very much, Miriam, for keeping trying. And Esther, I guess it's back to you because our time is over. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you, Cedric. So
thank you.
On behalf of YMCA, I would like to say thank you to Cedric, Miriam, John, Colin, Key, Umila, and Jamie for the amazing section. It's absolutely fantastic. So thank you all for your time, and thank you everyone for watching. The session will be available to watch back within 7 to 10 days of the summit, ending on World YMCA's YouTube channel. So, and the plenary stage will restart very shortly. It's going to start now. So please join us for some amazing closing remarks and reflections. Don't miss us there. Thank you so much, and goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Everyone.